First, I want to congratulate you, Senator Lee, on being chairman of the committee for your first hearing at the helm, and we're very grateful for your thoughtful leadership on these important hearings. We're getting underway, and tomorrow we have North Dakota Governor Burgum, who's here to testify, who's the nominee, and I assume we're going to hear another wonderful introduction by the great Senator, former Governor of North Dakota. Senator
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. That's right, congratulations. We've had a chance to visit. I have a number of questions, but before, and I'm going to submit most of them for writing. There were some questions from the senior senator from California about wildfires, and you were abruptly cut off from trying to answer, and he apologized for cutting you off. But I would want to give you time to now respond, if you'd like to, for some of the comments that he had made that you weren't able to respond to.
Oh, as someone who has spent my life focused on poverty and poverty abatement in our country and abroad, seeing people suffering, seeing people in pain, seeing people lose family members, lose their property, lose their sense of self, lose their security is absolutely heart-wrenching. It's horrible to watch what's happening in LA today. And wow, these are the kind of things we want to protect people from. We want to make our society more resilient, stronger. There's no words to say in the middle of a personal trauma, you know, that reflect global policy and all that. These are human tragedies that touch every one of us. I lived in California for 19 years, have lots of friends in the LA area. I probably get emotional talking about it. It's horrific to see what's happening there. We need to do everything we can to get those fires out, to get that infrastructure rebuilt, and to get people to return to the lives they had before it was visited on by these horrific fires.
I agree. It's heartbreaking, and I know we have our Wyoming National Guard there with equipment as well as manpower in trying to do that. I did what Senator Cortez Masto made a point about. Actually, it was your answer to Senator Cortez Masto mentioned that we've lost the capacity to enrich uranium. And America is dependent on imports right now to fuel our nuclear reactors. We have extremely limited commercial enrichment and conversion capacity, not in America's best interest. In 2023, Congress passed the Nuclear Fuel Security Act. We repurposed $2.7 billion in funding to support this goal. If confirmed, will you make it a priority to build and secure our nuclear fuel supply chain?
Senator, absolutely. I know we shared that concern in our dialogue in your office. It is a significant hole in the U.S. arsenal right now, a technology we developed, but yet we import most of it from abroad, and most that's enriched in the U.S. is by companies that are not American companies in the U.S. Yes, we need to build American nuclear infrastructure on mining, on enrichment, on power production, and on waste disposal, which is a tough challenge.
Congress passed legislation to ban imports of Russian uranium in the United States. This law is intended to revive American uranium production, strengthen our nuclear fuel supply. It has to be implemented correctly. The Secretary of Energy has the discretion to provide waivers to companies seeking to import uranium from Russia. Do you agree these waivers should be very limited and used only in extreme circumstances?
Senator, I would agree with that assessment. It is very sad how dependent we have become on imported enriched uranium from Russia. That is a sad state of affairs where we are today. We need to get beyond that, but we need to get beyond that without shutting down the nuclear power plants we have running today. So it is an area that requires urgent action.
Because it does seem that as the shutdown in Russian uranium, now we see more imports from China. So the next issue is confirm will you support efforts to end uranium imports from China as we continue to try to build the U.S. nuclear supply?
Yes, Senator, that is another country on which we should not be dependent upon for critical supplies. And of course, enrich uranium to turn on our lights and power our factories are critical supplies.
And then finally, with regard to advanced nuclear reactor and demonstration projects, Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program is meant to help developers overcome some of the hurdles that we have in terms of the expense early on. With the development, programs receive broad bipartisan support from this committee and across the Congress. So I look forward to getting the current projects over the finish line. Will you ensure the Department continues to be a faithful partner in this mission?
Yes, Senator, I think that is a key role of the U.S. government and particularly of the Department of the Energy to help bridge these technologies that have lots of running room, but mostly for government regulatory burden and uncertainty, have not been able to reach full commercial status yet.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We're now going to turn to another new member of the committee, our new colleague representing the state where I was born, and it turns out a fellow fan of mariachi music, Senator Gallego.
Thank you very much. Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Stefanik, congratulations. I believe you're going to be terrific. A couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. Just, Israel has continually been subjected to biased resolutions and politically motivated investigations at the United Nations. The UN so-called Human Rights Council has a standing agenda item, and that standing agenda item is called item number 7, and it exclusively targets Israel. It makes it the only member of the UN, the only member state singled out in this manner. The Council consistently devotes excessive time, I think time at all is excessive, in criticizing Israel while often overlooking the atrocities in countries like Iran, like Syria. 2024 alone, the UN General Assembly adopted 17 different resolutions against Israel, compared to only 6 against the whole rest of the world. I mean, it's astonishing that this is going on in the UN. So what are your views on item 7, and what steps would you think to do in terms of removal of this from the permanent agenda?
We need to work to remove it from the permanent agenda. This is counter to our national security interests. It's counter to our values. And this is emblematic of the anti-Semitic rot that is pervasive within the UN system. I'm a big believer in transparency. We saw over the course of exposing, frankly, the failed leadership at college campuses, the importance of providing a spotlight when there is a lack of moral clarity, because the American people strongly support the U.S.-Israel relationship. They understand the moral case and the importance of Israel and how we should not be funding or supporting or giving any platform, frankly, like this standing agenda item.
Are there things you have in mind in terms of how we can pay greater attention to the true human rights situations that are taking place in Iran, in Syria, and have the UN be forceful at all?
Yes, we should have, when previous U.S. ambassadors chaired the Security Council for their month, human rights was on the agenda item. I want to make sure that that continues to be a priority, speaking out on human rights issues, which there is significant bipartisan records of both sides of the aisle coming together to really raise the awareness and speak with that moral leadership from the United States of America on these humanitarian crises and speaking up for human rights.
You've answered a number of questions about China and today, and this is a question I want to ask you. I asked the same question to Senator Rubio the other day, because I think China continues to have an unfair advantage due to the definition of China being the status listed as a developing nation, as opposed to the second largest economy in the world. To me, it's not a developing nation, which has huge advantages as a result of that in terms of funding and ability to borrow money and others in the world stage. So do you believe that China is a, quote, developing nation, and what's your plan to ensure that China is no longer able to exploit what I believe is an inaccurate label currently at the UN?
No, and they have exploited not only that inaccurate label, but they are the greatest perpetrators of intellectual property theft. They are the most significant national security challenge. I think generationally, this will be the greatest challenge that my generation faces. And I think that we have an opportunity, because if you look at the bipartisan focus and concern on ensuring that we not only meet this challenge, but that our values, we continue to strengthen our partnerships and allies around the globe, I think we have an opportunity to deliver real bipartisan results in this space.
Right. You, I think, used the words accountability, transparency. I know that's the way you acted in Congress, and we'll do in this. The U.S. contributes, 22% of the UN total budget right now. How are you going to ensure that that financial burden at the UN are actually shared more equitably in accordance with current economic realities?
Well, first of all, working directly with members of the House and the Senate, with our oversight members and specifically the appropriators, is very important. I think, as I discussed, doing an assessment of all of our funds, ensuring that we're being good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars, that we're looking at results-based entities within the UN system, organizations that support American interest, America first, peace through strength, and working with our national security team to do so. I want to provide this committee with full transparency about where every dollar is going within the UN system, which, frankly, this committee has not gotten before, and we deserve that as good stewards of U.S. taxpayer dollars.
I believe I one time heard you say, we are the nation of the United States, not the United Nations. And how are you going to preserve and protect American sovereignty within the UN?
I deeply support American sovereignty, and I know that I'm going there to be, if confirmed, the ambassador of the United States to the United Nations and not the other way around, and I will always stand up for American values.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Senator Lee, thank you for joining.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much. Congratulations on your nomination. I think you're the right person for the job. I appreciate the chance we've had to meet and to visit because, look, in Wyoming, clearly, Social Security is critical to the people of our state, aging population. I travel the state. I hear from individuals all around, and they depend upon the program, the viability of the program, and we're looking for you to continue to make sure that people of Wyoming and people all across the country continue to receive the benefits that they've earned, they've paid into. And I think it's critical the program remains strong, keep our promises to current beneficiaries as well as to future generations. In order to do that, there are a number of issues that I think need to be addressed. Social Security Administration needs to focus on improving customer services, need to reduce wait times and backlogs, need to modernize and streamline technology and prevent improper payments. And improper payments is a part of this as well. So I think you're the right person to fix these problems. Are you committed to doing everything you can to strengthen the Social Security program and to helping our seniors?
I'm 100% committed. I appreciate the question, and, you know, I want to work on every aspect of what you talked about. It's a services org that has to have a high degree of quality and accuracy.
Well, it's interesting, we talked here recently about some of the problems with the press's reporting that are just plain wrong. And they might have looked at lists, and as the previous senator from New Mexico said, he said, I read articles that say this. Well, he may be reading articles that say that, but it doesn't mean it's correct. And case in point is we have a Social Security office in Rock Springs, Wyoming, Sweetwater County. People depend upon it. And I understand that there is a hearing room that is hardly ever used. I want to close the hearing room, but not the field office. Well, yet what gets reported in the news is the whole thing is going to be closed when there's no truth to that whatsoever as my office looked into it. So I think it's incumbent on people to, if you can't get a direct answer, you know, go to one of your representatives and let them try to check into it. But I'm sure you've seen cases after case of similar misrepresentation in the press.
Yes.
So under the current law, and I want to talk about legislation helping terminally ill individuals. Under current law, individuals who are given less than 6 months to live, they're currently forced to wait more than 5 months to receive their Social Security disability insurance benefits. Over the last several Congresses, I've been working on a bipartisan basis across the aisle on legislation to help these people with terminal illnesses receive timely access to benefits. People facing terminal illnesses shouldn't be worrying about whether and when they're going to receive the benefits that they need, especially when they have so little time to live and they, by law, have to wait 6 months. That's why I've co-sponsored legislation called the Expedited Disability Insurance Payments for Terminally Ill Individuals. It ends the 5-month disability insurance waiting period for those diagnosed with a terminal illness that have less than 6 months to live. It ensures people with terminal illnesses receive disability benefits in a timely manner while still preserving the integrity of the system. Last year, 30,000 people died waiting for their disability decisions from the Social Security Administration, of course, previous administration. The last thing people need to deal with when they're facing these end-of-life decisions should be concerned about trying to work their way through the red tape of the Social Security Administration. Americans or loved ones facing significant hardships should get help when they need it the most. So do you have views on the need to streamline and expedite these SSDI benefits for terminally ill individuals?
Well, I think in a case like that, many of these are really about process engineering on how to change how we do it. You know, obviously that should hit, you know, high priority. because of the sensitivity of the issue, and I'm happy to go look at it if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, sir.
So will you commit to working with me, with my office, including providing technical assistance as needed on making sure that we can get through this red tape?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In terms of improving customer service, and my colleague from New Mexico was just asking the same thing about the average wait times on the national 800 numbers doubled from about 20 minutes in 2019 to over 40 minutes in 2024 under the last administration. You know, days and days, what are your plans for addressing performance management and improving customer service?
Well, I think call centers is one of the easiest areas to manage and monitor and generate individual performance reports and collective performance reports. I also think that we need to ensure that we have the right technology for the agents who answer the phones, right? Because obviously we got to look at what the length and duration of call is, what they have to do to answer the call, what they have to do to collect the information. I think AI, while still talking to a human, can help the person, the call center agent, get to the problem much quicker.
And final question, Mr. Chairman, I know my time has expired. What's the biggest obstacle that you might face in trying to upgrade the systems and the infrastructure, as you just talked about the technology?
I think it's all about will. I think it's all about will. If you want to get it done, it's not hard to get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here to answer questions. I'm concerned from Wyoming and for workers across the country. I'm worried that foreign competitors continue to use unfair trade practices against the United States, against our workers, against our producers. These practices threaten our economic security, our prosperity. We want a safe and prosperous nation. Workers in my home state and across the country are paying the price. So can you just talk a little bit about how you determine if foreign trade and economic practices constitute an emergency for our country? And I just heard our previous speaker talk about asking ChatGPT. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask you, how is it that we determine if foreign trade and economic practices constitute an emergency for our country?
Thank you, Senator. In the first instance, when the president declares an emergency, he has to consider where there is, the conditions that may impact national and economic security. And so for him, he took a look at our trade deficit, which was the largest in human history under President Biden, 1.2 trillion. And we looked at what the effect of that was. And it includes loss of 5 million manufacturing jobs, loss of 90,000 factories, loss of competitiveness with China in advanced technology. And then we looked at what are some of the causes of the trade deficit. And certainly there's currency manipulation, there's other currency factors, but also non-reciprocity in trade, barriers overseas, whether tariffs or non-tariff barriers that keep us out, unfair trading practices like dumping and other things that push things into our market, or subsidies, or state-directed economies. And so those are the things we look at. And then when you move to the countries, obviously it's common sense to have a baseline to make sure there's no cheating and that we can get at the deficit broadly based, and then to have a higher rate for those who have who pose the biggest challenges in terms of the trade deficit and unfair practices.
Thanks. Could I ask you about nuclear fuel? And, for decades, America led the world in uranium production. Today, there's virtually no commercial enrichment capacity. We're dangerously dependent on imports from other countries. Congress took a strong stand by banning Russian uranium imports. We're now seeing a troubling shift with increased uranium imports coming from China. And we think it's the uranium from Russia going to China, which they then sell to the United States. So we've simply replaced one adversary with another. This poses to me a serious threat to our national security, to our energy independence. Wyoming has the resources and the workforce to revive American uranium production. But what we know is that subsidized foreign uranium from China and from Russia threatens to undermine our domestic industry. Well, you're going to support efforts to end uranium imports from China as we continue to try to build our U.S. nuclear supply.
Senator, I'm happy to talk to you about that and the best way to implement that kind of action.
Great. Market access for Wyoming beef. Our ranchers are seeing what you recently did, what the president has recently done, and say it's about time. I know you heard a lot about market access today. Just specifically discuss market access for American beef. It's our #1 cash crop in Wyoming. Our ranchers produce some of the highest quality beef in the world, yet our beef faces significant barriers in key foreign markets. So I do appreciate your office's efforts to document the numerous barriers that unfairly block American beef exports. For example, Thailand imposes a 50% tariff on American beef. The European Union's numerous, quote, Green Deal restrictions limit market opportunities for our ranchers. Australia's barriers prevent the sale of a safe, high-quality American beef. They've sold $29 billion into our country. We can't sell a hamburger there. So Wyoming beef producers have felt the direct impact of these unfair trade practices, and I say it's our #1 cash crop. What steps do you see being taken now to open new markets and ensure fair access for our beef around the world where we've been blocked?
So, Senator, as everyone knows, we have a lot of countries coming to talk to us right now who want to have more reciprocal trade, get their trade deficit down. And obviously part of that is making sure we have access for products like beef, making sure we're exporting products like beef. I've talked to the Australians about this issue. It's always surprising because they're a great partner for us globally. This is a big issue with them, Southeast Asia as well. These are things that are on our list when people come to talk to us. It's something we've recorded for years, and we expect countries to change this.
Great, thank you. In terms of critical minerals, we sit on vast deposits of critical minerals in Wyoming essential for our national security. Our state has significant reserves of rare earth elements. Are there some trade initiatives that you're taking right now that are going to pursue to counter China's dominance in the critical minerals world, both in terms of production as well as refinement?
Yes, well, I know, for example, this is at the Commerce Department, but I know they're considering whether they need to take some kind of an action and looking into potential Section 232 investigation of critical minerals to know, how we can get that here, how we can get processing here and our near abroad, how to make sure we're not dependent on China for those things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. I know you have had a busy week, and we appreciate that and appreciate what the president is trying to do for the broader economy. And of course, it is encouraging to hear that.
Congratulations on the nominations. I was just on the floor of the Senate noting the headlines that inflation's down. Lowest this past month from the time of COVID. So we're very encouraged by the Treasury Department and the work you're going to do. And I'd like to just visit a little bit about restoring tax fairness for Wyoming businesses, because as you see in Wisconsin and we see in Idaho, we're concerned about those things from our small family businesses. And President Trump is bringing back tax fairness for American job creators. We believe that. He was elected for that purpose. His administration's already taken action to end the weaponization of federal agencies against American businesses. For folks back home, this change couldn't come soon enough. Throughout the Biden administration time, our small businesses were plagued by reckless attacks from the Treasury Department, the IRS. For example, last year, Biden's Treasury Department launched a new audit initiative explicitly targeting family businesses and partnerships. They said they were closing loopholes. We view it a direct attack of small businesses, and what they really meant, squeezing billions from law-abiding taxpayers. They wanted to hire, 86,000 new IRS agents, and they say they're going to make money by spending all of that money. Well, the only way you do that is shaking down people that are obeying the law. What they did, basically, they buried Wyoming businesses in red tape, burdensome regulations, and all without congressional approval. Secretary Yellen, when she was Secretary of the Treasury, claimed that businesses were engaged in, as she said, high-end tax abuse. No evidence, just came up with that phrase, probably poll tested it. Look, family farms, ranches, Main Street businesses all across my home state of Wyoming were caught in the crosshairs. They found themselves facing complex audits meant for multinational corporations. Our small businesses couldn't afford expensive lawyers to fight these attacks. So, ask to both of you, and we'll start with Mr. Kimmett. Confirmed, how are you going to prevent the Treasury Department from targeting family businesses with burdensome regulations that go way beyond congressional intent?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I think with respect to my role in trade, I certainly support a tariff strategy that aligns with lower taxes and lower regulation and unleashing American energy to bring relief to American citizens. And so absolutely look forward to working with Treasury colleagues to bring that to fruition.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Mr. Case?
Absolutely, Senator Barrasso. Individual taxpayers are the backbone of our federal revenue base. As I pointed out earlier, total revenues in 2024 were $4.9 trillion. Individuals and payroll taxes, which are paid by individuals, represented $4.1 trillion of that, or 84% of all federal revenues. It is absolutely essential that we treat individual taxpayers fairly, provide them sound guidance, follow the Supreme Court's recent decision that directs all federal agencies to put out the best interpretation, not just a reasonable interpretation of a statute. The Treasury Department, assuming I'm confirmed in my role of implementing IRS or tax provisions through regulation, will follow that religiously.
I want to ask you, follow up with you. If I could ask you about retirement security policy. Americans deserve security and dignity in their retirement years. If confirmed, you'll oversee the Treasury Office that develops and implements tax policies related to retirement plans. You're well experienced in the area. In Wyoming, about 2/3 of our workforce spends their careers with more than 70,000 small businesses in the state. That's kind of how our economy is in the state. Our small businesses, they're the backbone of our economy and also the national economy. They face unique challenges in providing retirement benefits to their employees. The administration's the burdens and the costs of offering retirement plans sometimes have been obstacles for our job creators in Wyoming and across the country. So recent bipartisan legislation has made important strides in addressing these challenges. We must do more to ensure employees of our small businesses can build the kind of savings that they're going to need for a secure retirement. So if confirmed, how are you going to help reduce the burdens on small businesses that really do want to help their employees save for retirement?
So, Senator Barrasso, since the very first time I served in government, which was on the Ways and Means Committee in '81, and then again at the Joint Committee, I worked on numerous provisions affecting our defined benefit and defined contribution plans. I'm very keenly aware of the fact that these can be unduly complex, and our role at Treasury is to make these provisions work as smoothly and efficiently as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Smith. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on this nomination. I tell you about weaponizing the IRS. I think we saw that the last 4 years by the Biden administration against different groups and church groups, parents, all sorts of things. The IRS was weaponized. And I'm just going to ask you about restoring the credibility of the IRS, which I thought lost a lot of credibility during the last 4 years under Joe Biden and the Democrat control. So I think very few agencies in Washington are as present in the lives of working families as the IRS is. When you came to visit with me, I told you my concerns and the concerns of the people of Wyoming, that the IRS is the most powerful, but yet what we've seen in the past, the least accountable of the agencies of the government. So under the Biden administration, the president's really shifted from helping people understand our taxes to presuming everybody was breaking the law, that we were all a bunch of crooks. They wanted to add, 87,000 IRS agents to shake down small businesses, because even the Congressional Budget Office said, yeah, if you add all these more IRS agents, then they're going to bring in that much more money, because they're going to be out there auditing small businesses and going after families. And in Wyoming, I regularly hear from folks, they're just concerned about any dealings they have with the IRS. And if they don't hear from them, that's better, because these are honest taxpayers. They want to pay what they owe. They want to make sure that when they have a question, they can get an answer. And I think too often, if they call the IRS repeatedly, they're unable to get anybody to answer the phone or helping them comply, or saying, yeah, this is a number you can rely on and you pay this and it's fair. So, the IRS's audit notices don't seem to be delayed, but their answers seem to be delayed. But, this hiring of thousands of new agents to investigate taxpayers really, I think, set the IRS even further away from the American people in terms of an agency that they trust. So, if confirmed, you could just talk a little bit about how you hope to restore the credibility of the IRS with the American people.
And thank you for the question, and thank you for the time in your office. You know that my wife and her family have deep ties. That's where she was raised, out there in Wyoming. But I think that my three most important things at the IRS are fairness, fairness, and fairness. I think you have to be fair to the taxpayers, but you also have to have your employee partners that are going to work with them and not be intimidated by one or the other. And when you talk about calling the IRS and getting information, I mentioned earlier when I did talk radio for 6 years, there wasn't a week that went by that I didn't say you could call the IRS 5 days a week, with the same question to get 6 different answers. And unfortunately, that happens still today. I don't know how to prepare for something like this. I mean, my thought was go back and watch old commissioner hearings, for Senate approval of people that have been nominated to be commissioner of the IRS, because I thought that it was important to and it's the same thing over and over and over for all these years, whether it's technology, whether it's taxpayer fairness, heavy-handed investigations of people. And let's bring back common sense, as I told, I think it was Senator Young a while ago, that let's bring back common sense to the IRS and stay in constant communication with the senator's office, with the Congress's office. And when I just left Congress 2.5 years ago, I want people in my office to be able to sit in with you all when you're developing these laws. So once it's done, you don't have to spend 6 or 10, 12 months deciding what it meant, because that's what a lot of these problems are today that we've been discussing, or something goes over to the IRS and it takes them forever to put out guidance on it. And it's kind of like the king's horsemen roll into town and they jump off the horse and they roll out the scroll, and this is this week's edicts. And they roll it back up and go out of town, come back 3 weeks later and roll out another scroll with this week's edict that they're deciding over there. So I think communication is number one. And I've always been a pretty good communicator. And I want to have a very open door policy. And we were talking about Charles Rossetti earlier, and he said the first thing he did at the IRS, he went down there and all the doors were solid. You couldn't see anybody's in their office. He said, go get me a stopper, rubber stopper. And he propped his door open from that day on so that people could have accessibility to him and get in. And I'm going to improve on Charles' system. I'm going to have anybody that wants to get on my schedule every morning for 90 minutes before the place opens to hear their concerns, to hear how we can treat taxpayers better and not be heavy-handed. We got to collect, what do we collect, 96% of the income in this country through the IRS, so it's a pretty important agency. And I know that, the position I am, it's, not what everybody aspires to be, but through my years on the radio and everything, all the issues that I knew people had with the IRS, and when I was at Congress for 12 years, that was a large part of our constituent services.
We have one last question, and it's on protecting taxpayer data. And people are very concerned about their own private information. Last answer, you said you'd worked on the word intimidation. People feel intimidated, and especially their worry is that their data may get out there, information that they don't want shared with anybody, and it's because of some hacking or something has in the IRS. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that, it's vitally important. 6103 is the longest section in the IRS code, and I think we have to bend over backwards to do everything we can possibly do to protect that data.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for the great job you're doing. A couple of questions. I think during your initial hearing for this position, we talked about leasing and permitting for energy development. I thought it was a disaster under the previous administration. Can you just talk a little bit about what actions the department has taken over the past number of months to correct course and what it plans to do in the next fiscal year?
Thank you, Senator. Well, first of all, part of what we're doing is trying to reverse some of the activity which didn't follow the law last time around, because part of what precedes permitting sometimes is leasing, and the federal government under the Biden administration was, as proven by court, states took the federal government, the Biden administration, to court. Biden administration lost. They were supposed to be holding lease sales. They weren't. When they don't hold a lease sale, that's lost revenue to the American public. So again, trying to get back on track on both onshore and offshore lease sales, both in the lower 48, the Gulf of America, in Alaska, has been a big effort. On the permitting standpoint, we're getting closer to putting up a transparency dashboard, which will be able to show by department, by state, by permit type, where permits are in the process, how many days they've been in the queue. I think that this kind of shining this light on this will help the public and others understand, just how much red tape we've created, but it'll also create an opportunity for us to accelerate. We also quietly announced that we felt that we could get an environmental assessment, an EA, done in less than 14 days, and that we could get a EIS done in less than 28 days. On the pilots that we've done already, both of those have been accomplished. Correct. People have said, how is that even possible that you can reduce something by such a factor. But it turns out that if you're doing an EA and somebody works on it for a few hours and they pass it on to somebody else and it sits on their desk for a month, and then they pick it up, they work on it, they pass it on. By the time you get a year's gone by, you know, we've got an opportunity where we can put more minutes on mission, more time on task in 2 weeks than what they might have put in a year, and the quality product that we can put up at the end of that will inform the decisions that the private sector and public local political subdivisions need to make. So I know that we can actually deliver a work product faster, but this is about improved business processes. And of course, in your state, we are now, in a few weeks, I mean, we're going to be permitting new mining operations for the first time in decades in this country, and we've approved it for the first time in Montana, some mining operations. So again, we're back. This nation has to get back in the mining game. We've got to get back in the energy development game, and we're pleased to be part of that.
In addition, we talk about my state. You know, after the Biden administration lost the election, they came out with some punishing things. Out of office, they lose the House, lose the Senate, lose the White House, and their Bureau of Land Management finalized what was the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan, which is the final plan is punishing to the state of Wyoming, devastate the people and the economy of Southwest Wyoming, locked up millions of acres of land, the local communities, the entire state relies upon. Can you just talk about what the department's doing now?
Well, the Rock Springs RMP and as well as the Buffalo one, I mean, these were a couple of things that were incredibly egregious that weren't really management plans. I mean, they were creating new concepts out of whole cloth that was really meant to restrict all forms of land use as opposed to follow the multi-use mandate that we're given. So those are under review, and we hope to get back to following the law and make sure that the citizens of Wyoming and those private landowners that live in those areas have an opportunity that they have the same opportunities to thrive that others do without the heavy hand of government.
And we knew, as in your home state and in mine, we're very fortunate to have great relationships across the state between private, state, federal partners. In Lander, Wyoming, there's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office that serves both tribal nations, the Northern Arapaho, the Eastern Shoshone, on the Wind River Reservation, along with our neighboring counties. The office does valuable work for Wyoming, such as big game monitoring, studies of wildlife disease, grizzly bear management, habitat restoration. There's been some confusion on the status of the office and whether the staff are currently present or not. Can you give us an update on the current status of the Fish and Wildlife Office there?
The Lander, Wyoming office is an important office, and we're going to make sure that it's staffed and able to execute against their important duties and do that from the Lander office as opposed to working remotely from someplace else.
Great. In terms of sage grouse, we're the home of a large population of greater sage grouse and habitat. For over 15 years, Wyoming has been in the forefront of adopting and paying for new management approaches to protect the species. Biden administration proposed to designate over 600,000 acres as so-called areas of critical environmental concern, which is basically a way of locking up the land. Is the department planning on reopening the greater sage grouse management plan? Do you know?
Yeah, the greater sage grouse is neither on the threatened or endangered species, and this critical habitat you described, again, is another whole cloth creation that effectively creating a wilderness area out of nothing. And so we're taking a hard look at that because we want to get back to following the actual law.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
I look forward to working with you. Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. To follow up, Ms. Guilfoyle, on what you were just talking about with the NATO and the importance of the relationship and how closely we are aligned. There's a military naval support activity, Suda Bay, vital U.S. military installation. I know there's going to be updates. I think $44 million has been committed to invest in new joint mobility processing center in that area. Can you just overall give us some things, what opportunities you see for increased cooperation with Greece as these upgrades are completed? Because you, I think, appropriately called attention to the fact that all of these countries have now committed to going up to 5%.
They have, which I think is incredibly important. That was committed to at the Alliance and at The Hague, and that is something that I know that these countries have intentionality to fulfill and to continue that commitment that they made to us. Thank you for bringing up these questions, Senator. Suda Bay, yes, as you know, is the largest U.S. military base in Greece. It is strategically and geopolitically critical to the United States. It's been a really wonderful asset for us, for our military base, especially in that area of the world. So we're going to continue to look forward to that and make sure, and if confirmed, I plan to visit all of these facilities to deepen my keen understanding of the issues, the people, the needs, so that we maintain that strength for American interests and American national security. Revithusa is also incredibly important because there are unbelievable opportunities for liquid natural gas, which could be crucial to limit the influence, undue influence in the region of Russia, of China, and make sure that we push back on that on a daily basis. There are certain things that have happened that have been very disheartening as it relates to national security in the port of Piraeus, where the Chinese were allowed to gain access and purchase that. What I'm proud to say is the Greek people have now implemented a system that somewhat mimics what we have here in the United States, CFIUS, to prevent from foreign interests and countries encroaching on sovereign nations and buying up key national security ports and interests. So that is something that I was encouraged that has happened recently in the past month or so, and I look forward to partnering with them to make sure that we can use some of our models of best practices in those ways to make sure that there isn't over-encroachment of foreign influence and interest in key ports, and work with them strategically to help understand how we're able to prevent that in the United States of America. Thank you for the question.
Well, I appreciate your comment about energy, because I think of energy as the master resource. Greece, I think, is quickly becoming a major energy hub in the Eastern Mediterranean. You talked about LNG. They've expanded their LNG terminals. I think they've earlier this year signed an agreement with Chevron and ExxonMobil to do more. So just generally, could you give us a little thought on American energy companies in Greece's energy sector, and how will you support and encourage this effort for more energy?
Great opportunities that I mentioned exist with Revithusa, with the LNG terminal, which is key to that regional energy strategy. Also in Alexandroupoli, the LNG terminal, that's essential for U.S. energy exports and for Balkan access. So this is, again, why I would like to just stress the importance of Greece, the seriousness of this position, the opportunity we have to grow and strengthen the alliance and the bond between the Greek Americans and the United States of America and those living, working, visiting in Greece to ensure their safety, productivity, and make sure that their needs are met. And I really look forward to working with the absolutely incredible people that are so talented in the State Department and the careers, and the people that are currently serving in the embassy, working tirelessly to ensure that American interests are represented, and to work for President Trump to effectuate his goals, his beliefs for the United States of America.
Thank you. Mr. Bartos, the U.S. Is the United Nations' largest financial contributor. Provides more funding than all other permanent Security Council members combined. I hear about that in Wyoming a lot. People aren't really happy with this. Despite this significant investment, the UN has struggled to implement meaningful budgetary discipline to demonstrate consistent fiscal accountability. I think next week this committee is going to have a hearing with the nominee to be our U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. U.S. contribution represents about 22% of the UN's total budget. How are you going to ensure that the financial burdens at the UN are shared more equitably and in accordance with current economic realities? And are you committed to limiting the growth of UN regular budget and ensuring that the UN makes more efficient use of its existing resources?
Senator, thank you for the question. As you stated, the United States, the generosity of the American people knows almost no bounds. We have been the most generous supporter of the United Nations system since it was founded 80 years ago, and we are the most generous nation on earth, and proudly so. But our fellow citizens, all Americans, deserve to know that every dollar that they send, every hard-earned dollar that an American taxpayer sends to the UN must not, cannot go to a penny cannot go to waste, fraud, and abuse, and every dollar must go to support programs and policies that make our nation safer, stronger, and more prosperous. If confirmed, I will devote all of my energies. We're 22% of the regular budget, as you say, sir. We're 25% of the peacekeeping budget, limited by statute. The UN seeks to assess us at 26.1%. And so it's incumbent upon my role, if confirmed, on the Fifth Committee on Budget and Oversight, to root out all of this waste and to make, and really, and I said this before, with President Trump's leadership, with the Secretary's leadership, and their charge to us, if confirmed, our team will have that presidential leadership to go there and make sure that those reforms are implemented. Our dollars carry a lot of weight, but over the last 80 years, they haven't, as you say, they actually haven't really been put to the best use by the system to the United States' interest. We need to do better. We must do better, and I commit to you, sir, if confirmed, we will do better.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Booker.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of you. I appreciate your time and willingness to serve. Mr. Eros, thanks so much for visiting with me. You know, the previous administration sought to delay and deny efforts to expand coal mining. This had a profoundly destructive impact on Wyoming, on families and our communities. I think it also had a significant impact destructively in terms of our energy security as a nation. If confirmed, how are you going to change the course of OSM?
Well, I think what we need to do is look at NEPA. So there was a decision came down from the Supreme Court recently in regard to NEPA, and I think it was very telling. From what I recall reading, the idea is to focus NEPA on the areas to be affected, not so much upstream, downstream. Substantial deference to the reviewing agency, and I think that goes a long way in ensuring that those NEPA reviews are done timely. We get EISs approved and a record of decisions out quickly. So I think that's one thing we look at is NEPA. I think that's a big deal. I think program amendments is another. I spoke to that earlier. I think we have to look at that. There's probably 30, 35 program amendments sitting at OSM right now that has a significant effect on the states and how they do business. So we need to look at that too.
Well, and to your point, in terms of the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, it was an 8-0 decision. I mean, that's, you know, we're not talking about something that was close at all. And Justice Kavanaugh wrote the report. And NEPA is a procedural cross-check, not a substantive roadblock. The goal, he said, of the law is to inform agency decision-making, not paralyze it. So I'm very glad that you pointed out the Supreme Court ruling, and it's going to help influence your ability to get things done effectively and quickly. You know, one of the successes of that office that you're going to be holding, hopefully after your confirmation, depends on strong relationships with the states that execute things like the mine programs, both for mine development and for cleanup. States need clear guidance and an open line of communication to carry out these shared goals. So if confirmed, how will you approach strengthening the cooperation between the federal government and the states?
So we'll do exactly what we did under the first Trump administration, Senator. I had scheduled meetings with the state folks. I had scheduled meetings with the Interstate Mining Compact Commission, who represent many, most, if not all, of the states that have primacy across the country that actually mine coal. So you have to communicate with the states. If you're not communicating, if you're not talking, you're not moving forward. And if you're not talking, you're going backwards. So it's all about communication. I represented Ohio for a decade on the IMCC, Interstate Mining Compact Commission. I have many relationships across the country with all the state regulators. So we'll continue to do that. I think that'll serve us well.
Right. Ms. Robertson, the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, it's in charge of investing in innovative ideas and the way that give you the best chance of success with all those. So how do we ensure that our limited funding is spent on the highest priority work?
Thank you for the question, Senator Barrasso. I think the President's priorities have been to create reliable, affordable, secure energy. And through that lens, we must make decisions regarding allocation of funds to ensure that the American taxpayer dollars are invested in the programs, projects, and advancements that will create the most meaningful impact to the United States. And I think, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, this is, you know, because we're limited money and we want to make sure that we get the best bang for the buck. Senator
Absolutely.
Cantwell just asked about a specific project, and I just thought, overall, give you an opportunity to talk about.
Thank you. I do believe that there are 11 offices within EERE, and the pioneering technologies that are happening in geothermal, in bioenergy, and water power, there's a lot of exciting developments that don't violate the laws of nature or thermodynamics and have real potential.
Well, Mr. Eisner, she said, don't violate the laws and have potential. So with your role, if confirmed, you're going to lead the office that oversees our participation in the International Energy Agency. In recent years, the IEA has changed its focus away from analyzing the world as it is sought to project the world with its policy preferences in mind. If confirmed, how will you work with the IEA to get the agency back to providing unbiased analysis?
Thank you, Senator, for that very important question. I enjoyed serving as a keynote speaker at the Rockies Petroleum Conference with you last year in Laramie, Wyoming. I think that the key to effective advocacy and effective diplomacy really is leadership and good data, and I very much look forward to having had much experience in my career working with heads of state, government ministers, diplomats. I feel like I can be a very effective advocate of the U.S. position and the President's energy agenda in all of the bilateral and multilateral forums that I will have the honor, if I'm confirmed, to participate in.
Thank you, Mr. Here this morning. We really haven't had an opportunity to meet. I've read your bio. I look forward to working with you in the next few years. Congratulations on this important appointment, and incredibly important for Wyoming. And I appreciate your willingness to join us in Wyoming at the Wyoming Stock Growers later this month in Cody, Wyoming. And I'm glad that you'll be meeting with our livestock producers and learning how you can help strengthen the management of our national forest with effective livestock grazing. I also want to congratulate you and thank you for working with Secretary of Agriculture Rollins, your work on rescinding the roadless rule a few weeks ago. That rule, to me, was outdated. It was outdated policy that has hindered forest management in Wyoming for years. This is going to restore vital forest health. It's going to help reduce wildfire risk across the country and help to boost responsible timber production. So thank you for your leadership there. With regard to timber production, over 2 years ago, the Nyman Enterprise announced layoffs and shift reductions at their Spearfish, South Dakota Forest Products facility. At their facility in Hewlett, Wyoming, they reduced down to 1 shift. This has significantly reduced their capacity as a result of the Biden administration's limiting of timber production, and this has impacted the sawmills all around. What's the agency doing to retain the remaining forest products infrastructure in the Black Hills National Forest?
Senator, thank you for that question. We've been working very closely with the Nymans and the industry up there to understand the issues and move forward. So there's 3 specific things that we've done. We've identified staff that we've transferred to the Black Hills, actually from Washington State, to help assist in preparing sales. We've increased funding for them in the short term to help address some of the shortfalls in funding that they've had to do more work. The other piece is we're collaborating with not only the industry, but some NGOs near Wild Turkey Federation, Mule Deer Foundation, and also with the state of Wyoming under the GNA program to increase predictability of the program for the Black Hills. So those are the 3 things we're doing: staffing, funding, and collaborating with those entities to ensure that we have the right plan in place.
Thank you. And then you're helping with the local communities as well. So
yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. In terms of, you said we must steward tax dollars wisely. I appreciate that. We've had a number of fairly significant fires in Wyoming last year. The House Draw Fire, Johnson County, 175,000 acres. The Elk Fire, 98,000 acres. Rural communities in the West are bracing again for this year. And of course, resources are spread thin. Federal and state agencies, I believe, must work together. So can you talk about how the Forest Service is engaging state, local, and private partners to ensure we can effectively respond to wildfires?
Yes, sir. Senator, so first of all, the National Association of State Foresters represents those state interests in many cases. We've had ongoing dialogue throughout the year with them, and going into the fire season, we increased that dialogue. We've had preseason meetings with all of our cooperators, both at the local government level, the volunteers, and the state. So those meetings have been accomplished. The big thing, though, this year, operating agreements are already all in place for all the states so that when issues come up in terms of who is going to pay the cost of fighting the fire, those questions are not going to be in front of us. That's all been agreed to already. So in terms of that will not impact any tactics or strategies in fighting fire with some concern of who's going to pay for those fires. So those are things that we've done pre-season to ensure that we are prepared and working with our partners.
In this committee over the years, we talk about how many millions of acres of our national forests are at high or very high risk of wildfire. I think it's about 63 million acres right now. In fiscal year 2024, the U.S. Forest Service treated only about 4 million acres of our national forests. I think it's imperative that the U.S. Forest Service start planning on how they're going to treat all these high-risk areas within our national forest system. You inherited the prior administration's budget deficit as well. Can you talk about how you plan to lead the agency to catch up from the last 4 years in forest management?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. So I think the big thing is relying on partners. If you recall, there was a disaster bill passed at the end of the year last year. There was about $75 million that Sierra Pacific is putting that money to use on federal lands to create fuel breaks. So we're going to be looking at other partnerships, whether that's with NGOs, whether it's directly with industry, but helping us to manage the national forest system to increase the pace and scale of what we're doing. So that's a big part of our strategy. It's also going to be relying on states to do that.
And my final question, Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for your indulgence. Just last week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced it'll be revising the NEPA regulations, the National Environmental Policy Act. So I commend you and Secretary Rollins for your efforts to reduce unnecessary red tape and to streamline the projects. As you're well aware, the Forest Service is required to update and develop land management plans to guide management of our national forests. I understand the U.S. Forest Service has been conducting public and stakeholder meetings, so Wyoming's voice will be heard. Currently, Wyoming, the Bridger-Teton National Forest, and the Black Hills National Forest are undergoing their forest plan revision process. Can you please give us an update on your timelines for these forest plans?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. So the Black Hills Plan was started in 2001. The Phase 1 assessment is complete, and we expect to have the full plan completed in 2027. So there's ongoing public involvement there. On the Bridger-Teton Plan, that was started in 2024. The draft assessment is out currently today for public review. That public review will end in August of 25, and we expect that entire process should take 2 to 3 years to complete that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Waltz, thanks so much for coming to my office yesterday, and I enjoyed the discussion. I know you're going to do a terrific job representing our nation's interests at the United Nations. We are the largest financial contributor to the U.S. We've contributed, what, $13 billion to the United Nations the last fiscal year. As the U.S. ambassador to the UN, you're going to need to closely examine how American taxpayer funding is being used by so many of these international programs. Can you talk about your commitment to reviewing every dollar going to the UN to ensure that our taxpayer dollars is being used wisely? And I mean, if I recall, you had a list yesterday of just some amazing places that I think taxpayers would be really offended to see that their taxpayer dollars were going to through the United Nations. Could you share some of that information with us?
Thank you, Senator, and I always appreciate our time together. One of the kind of the main thrusts of the UN, particularly over the last, I'd say, couple of decades, has been on climate and focus on climate change and a number of initiatives. And setting aside the debate on climate, if you just look at the organizations amongst the 80 various specialized agencies, core programs, and funds, you have the UN Environment Program, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environmental Program, the Global Environment Facility, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, the Montreal Protocol, and then you have other agencies like the Global Fund for HIV, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Okay, but it has as its core mission, one of its core missions, not necessarily those things, but climate change is the largest global health challenge in the 21st century. And just to further, I mean, I have a page here, Mr. Chairman, or I have a list of pages, 455 of international organizations that we contribute some type of funding towards, and just
let's put those in the record.
A few of them. The Pacific Salmon Commission, the Pacific Islands Forum Fishery Agency, the Pan-African Postal Union, the Pan-American Health Organization, the Pan-American Institute on Geography and History, the International Lithosphere Program. I mean, so these are the, again, this is, it's quite a list. And this is tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to 7 to 8 figures to millions that are going to these organizations. And I think it is incumbent on this administration to say, what's it doing? Is it making us safer, stronger, and more prosperous? And are we getting a bang for our buck?
A couple other questions, because the thing I hear about at home in Wyoming is American sovereignty and what the United Nations is trying to do and undermining us. How are you going to work to preserve and to protect American sovereignty within the UN?
Thank you, Senator. And I have to say, America's sovereignty will always be first and foremost as we engage all of these international organizations. I think we need to weigh the pros and cons of which organizations we engage, and I think that will be a robust discussion with this committee and with the administration. But to the extent that we do, our sovereignty, our people, our bosses will be first and foremost and top of mind.
I think this came up in both the introduction, a good introduction by Senator Lee, as well as Senator Scott, and in your opening remarks. The fact that the Palestinian Authority has repeatedly sought to use the United Nations as a platform to declare statehood and to downgrade the status of Israel. Will you commit to using the American veto to block these one-sided anti-Israel resolutions at the UN Security Council?
Thank you, Senator. Of course, I will work closely with the President and the Secretary on those votes, but yes, I'll make that commitment.
Do you have any specific measures that you believe should be taken to address the bias against Israel within the UN, and how do we advocate for those changes?
Well, first and foremost has to be UNRWA. It simply not only needs to be defunded, which the President has put in place with his executive order, but it should be dismantled, and we can have a conversation on who and what can take up those humanitarian roles, but it certainly should not be UNRWA.
And then in terms of the selecting a new Secretary General after this term expires, is that something I imagine you'd be very much involved in and perhaps could use some of those same plans in terms of what we need to do there?
So the Secretary General's term will expire at the end of next year. My understanding is kind of the race, so to speak, and the campaigning for that will start this fall, and I'll certainly commit to work with you and others to make sure that we have someone in line with our interests.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd suggest that make sure we have somebody representing the United States at the UN with this nominee by that time, that all those activities begin.
Good
Thank you.
suggestions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would note the administration's arrangement with Mountain Pass, I think, is really innovative. Their mine in California is incredibly important, and the factory that they have built in Dallas-Fort Worth, I've been to that factory where they're building rare earth batteries right now. It's incredibly important, and their stated plans in cooperation with the administration is to increase their capacity tenfold. That's critically important for us being able to compete and beat China in this important terrain. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. Ambassador Pratt, so China controls, 85% of the world's critical mineral processing capacities. In fact, China has control over a significant percentage of Africa's mining sector, and they get things there and taken to China for the processing. And we're taking steps here in the United States to break this dependence. Earlier this month, the Secretary of Energy was in Wyoming with us. The Brook Mine in Wyoming broke ground. It's the first rare earth mine to open in the U.S. in over 70 years. This is going to produce rare earths vital for defense and advanced technologies, critical. So how can the U.S. and African countries collaborate to make sure that we can build some supply chains that challenge China's dominance so that never again will we find ourselves this dependent on China or any foreign source?
Thank you, Senator. We are trying to ensure that the U.S. has the feedstock that it needs of various minerals, including cobalt, lithium, and many others. And so part of the strategy is to leverage commercial access and take advantage of the offers that we're receiving on the continent from various countries, and also to take advantage of financing through the DFC. As you may know, there's a rare earth mine in South Africa that receives DFC financing. In Mozambique, we have a graphite mine that receives DFC financing. These are examples of how we've been able to successfully use the DFC to ensure access to the minerals that we need in the U.S. While we continue to develop domestic capacity on the mining and refining side of the equation.
It just seems to me the Chinese Communist Party has been really targeting investments in African countries in order to expand their political influence, their economic influence, their strategic goals. I mean, you look at the whole Belt and Road Initiative and different things that they've done. I was in Djibouti visiting Wyoming National Guard troops. You fly in and there's this base for ships that they're building right there in this pinch point, the Gulf of Aden, where it comes down to the to go up into the Red Sea. It's a narrow area and a big base there. Going into Djibouti, go through Addis Ababa, big terminal for Chinese for air supply. There's a project, and the chairman knows about this with our time with Senator Inhofe, who has spent a lot of time in Ethiopia, very involved, something called Project Mercy, a hospital. Baylor medical students would go there to train and to help and to learn. And a lot of U.S. involvement there. Used to be a kind of a dirt road, and now it's a beautiful road, and the signs are brought to you by your friends from China, because they built the road. It's a U.S. active medical center that China seems to try to take control over so many areas in terms of their effort to try to go with influence, political, economic, strategic. So, you know, it seems their investments are focused on large projects and natural resources. Can you just talk about what risk these China investments in critical minerals pose to us long-term in the United States if we don't do something to counter it?
Senator, first I'd like to say thank you for mentioning Djibouti, because I served there as U.S. Ambassador for 2.5 years before this assignment, and spent much of my time advocating to try to receive more U.S. investment. We were working very closely with a U.S. company that had a large energy investment there, and I worked very closely with our own government to put money into some strategic security investments, like a peacekeeping center that we're jointly working on with the Djiboutians. And so we have made some major investments there, and we're trying to court additional ones. I think what you mentioned on Africa's involvement is that essentially they've tried to create monopoly situations where they can control pricing and box out any other players on the supply chain, essentially is what they've engaged in through bribes, labor practices, and then price manipulation. And so what we are aggressively trying to do is ensure that U.S. companies get in. I was speaking about all of the companies that approached us at the beginning of this year to be involved in the peace process on Congo, but also to help them secure deals as part of that. And so we're working on an economic framework to achieve that. I think we also need to leverage the DFC. We need to frankly, leverage a lot of the goodwill that we see on the African continent for wanting to partner with American companies because of our labor standards, because of our transparency and the way that we do business. There are many countries on the continent that come to us, and they tell us they would prefer an American company to a Chinese company. No question about it. And so it's our job to ensure that the U.S. companies are getting a fair deal, and that we're taking those governments up on the offer and making sure that the deals are nailed down.
Mr. Chairman, I have time for one more question. Thanks. Well, you mentioned the Congo, the DRC. They produce about 80% of the world's cobalt. I saw that Secretary of State Rubio was just involved, and then the President as well, with an agreement between Rwanda and the DRC, a peace agreement after so many years of war. China owns or holds stakes in 15 of the largest copper and cobalt mines in the Congo. The Congo, 80% of the world's cobalt. In 2023, over half of the DRC mine workers reported children working in the sites. 4 out of 5 of the cobalt mine workers reported forced labor conditions. China itself has a well-documented history of forced labor. We know the Uyghurs and what has gone there. What role should we be playing in terms of investment, in terms of diplomatic efforts in combating this forced labor linked to these supply chains? And what's the best strategy, you think, to eliminate the practices of forced labor going on there?
Senator, I'd say number one is securing deals for U.S. companies and getting American companies into these investments, including on cobalt. Not just cobalt, but lithium is another one we're working on. There's a particular mine in the DRC. And so we are ensuring that those companies which came to us and asked for help, that we are linking them with President Tshisekedi of the Congo's offer very publicly to the United States that he wanted American companies in there doing business, working in these mining sectors. And so we are working very hard to ensure that those deals are nailed down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Torello, congratulations. I want to congratulate you on this nomination. It's so clear your decades of public service, both in the House of Representatives and at the Federal Trade Commission, have prepared you well for the role which you've been nominated. As Assistant Secretary of Financial Resources, you're going to advise Secretary Kennedy on the Department of Health and Human Services budget, financial management, grant programs, and you're going to oversee their implementation. So this one big, beautiful bill that we just passed included a dedicated effort to help support rural health care through the creation of, as you know, the Rural Health Transformation Program. This program is going to provide over $500 million to each state to support our hospitals, clinics, and health centers. It's going to help ensure that health care facilities across rural and frontier Wyoming are going to continue to provide high-quality care close to home. Congressional Republicans designed this program specifically to avoid the red tape and the bureaucratic delays that often happen with government funding, so states can actually access these funds and quickly put them to work. So last week I was in Wyoming, visited with a number of healthcare providers, including the head of the Wyoming Hospital Association, and the questions they ask is, as you oversee the distribution of this Rural Health Transformation Program funds, how are you going to ensure that states can access the funds efficiently?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question, and thank you on this topic that is near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Cooperstown, New York. My mother was a nurse at our local hospital. My first job as a teenager was volunteering there. And healthcare has been a passion of mine. And when I was at the FTC, I looked at lots of healthcare mergers in the rural space and looked at healthcare markets in general. And when I'm enthusiastic because of Secretary Kennedy's support for bolstering care in rural markets. The way I approach things as an antitrust lawyer is looking at how we can get the best quality services and care, most choices to people, to the consumers, at the lowest and most effective prices. So I will lean into the operating divisions that are handling the distribution of the funds and evaluating that and bringing my competition principles to bear so that we can get the best quality solutions. Not all rural markets are created equal. They have different needs, and weighing in on those things and bringing, again, looking at my background, looking at different healthcare markets and hospital markets will be a priority of mine, and bringing that to the staff there.
Well, it sounds like then I can count on you to commit to working closely with the states as this program is rolled out.
I would expect that working with the states and, again, through the operating divisions that already have those relationships to bolster the effectiveness of those.
Thank you. Mr. Switzer, I want to talk about Chinese uranium. You have considerable experience with China. I think it gives you unique insight into how they operate in global markets. I'm particularly concerned with how their deceptive trade practices, of which you're very familiar, threaten our critical nuclear supply chain. In 2024, Congress banned Russian uranium imports to protect our national security, but now it seems that China is helping Russia circumvent the ban and undermine American nuclear fuel producers. We ban Russia, Russia gives it to China, China to the United States. Just this year, China has already exported over 150,000 pounds of uranium to the United States. We have clear evidence that this is Russian-enriched uranium going to China, which they then dump into the U.S. market. So we're just kind of swapped one adversary for another. Wyoming has the resources, the workforce to rebuild the American nuclear supply chain. State-subsidized Russian and Chinese uranium undermines our domestic industry. Can you commit to working with Congress to end this Chinese circumvention of our Russian uranium ban? And do you have any thoughts on the matter?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. It's a very important issue. What I'm concerned about the entirety of the critical mineral supply chain, including uranium. I commit to working with Congress. I think there are aspects of this that USTR can do. There are aspects of this that maybe executive order could look at. But there are always, especially if you want sort of binding long-term solutions, Congress is where you look to find those kinds of solutions. So like Ambassador Greer, I commit to working with you and finding any way possible to address these issue sets. We need the ability to support supply critical minerals, including uranium, in the United States wherever possible, to process those profitably wherever possible. And where not possible, we want to be sourcing those from friendly nation states and allies and partners.
Great. Last week we had Secretary Wright, Secretary of Energy in Wyoming, since you mentioned critical minerals in addition to uranium, for the groundbreaking of the first critical minerals and elements mine in the country in 70 years. And my concern, of course, is we don't want to be dependent upon anybody for that. So how will you work with our Asian allies to counter China's domination in terms of global critical minerals?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity. I was in charge of our economic relationship with Japan. I was the economic affairs chief on the Japan desk many years back, and I've worked closely across Southeast Asia. The government of Japan is very interested in actually partnering with us on this. My understanding, again, I'm not in yet, so I don't know the specifics, but my understanding of the U.S.-Japan trade agreement is that there's a $550 billion of pledged financing to go into these sorts of projects. So what we look to do is how can we work with countries like Japan, with governments like Wyoming, with folks like Mountain Pass and others who actually do this processing, and the Department of Defense, who can then fund some of this. But what we need is a holistic supply chain. We need from mine to final product, and not just defense products. We need them to go into our cars, into our planes, and that's how you get a long-term, sustainable, efficient, competitive supply chain across the board.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being with us today. I believe one of President Trump's greatest achievements was his bold and successful actions on COVID. When faced with a global pandemic, he didn't back down. He was determined to find a cure, and through Operation Warp Speed, a vaccine was developed that distributed quickly, safely, effectively, and I believe it saved many, many lives. I think it's a model of American ingenuity and public-private partnership. But this wasn't the first time an American president acted boldly to address disease and vaccines. There's a great book that's out. It's a prize-winning book called The Fate of the Day by Rick Atkinson, and he talks about the courageous efforts by George Washington. During the Revolutionary War, George Washington reversed his opposition to the smallpox vaccine, and he ordered that all the soldiers be vaccinated. It was among the most consequential decisions Washington would ever make. By protecting his troops from smallpox, Washington preserved the Continental Army, which allowed our nation to continue to fight for our independence. And like President Trump, I believe President Washington acted decisively to protect Americans' lives at a time of great national peril. So over the last 50 years, vaccines are estimated to have saved 154 million lives worldwide. I support vaccines. I'm a doctor. Vaccines work. Secretary Kennedy, in your confirmation hearings, you promised to uphold the highest standards for vaccines. Since then, I've grown deeply concerned. The public has seen measles outbreaks, leadership in the National Institute of Health questioning the use of mRNA vaccines, the recently confirmed director of Centers for Disease Control and Prevention fired. Americans don't know who to rely on. Recent polls said 89% of voters, 81% of Trump voters agree vaccine recommendations should come from trained physicians, scientists, public health experts. So, they believe, Senator Marshall, Senator Cassidy, they believe me when it comes to vaccines. If we're going to make America healthy again, we can't allow public health to be undermined. So could you explain what steps you're going to be taking to ensure vaccine guidance is clear, evidence-based, and trustworthy?
We're going to make it clear, evidence-based, and trustworthy for the first time in history. For most, right now, when I was a kid, I got 3 vaccines, I was fully compliant. Today's children have to get between 69 and 92 vaccines in order to be fully compliant, between maternity and 18 years. Only one of those 19 vaccines, 92 doses, only one of those vaccines has ever been tested against an inert placebo. And what we're doing now is any new vaccine that before it's approved and licensed will have to demonstrate safety against an inert placebo. And we're going to go back and do observational studies on the existing vaccines to see if they're linked to any of these chronic disease epidemics so that people can understand the risk profile of those products and make good assessments for their own health.
So in 2 weeks, vaccine experts at the CDC are going to meet to discuss childhood vaccine recommendations. Parents and physicians depend upon this guidance to make decisions and to keep kids safe. And as I said, I support vaccines. I've been hearing from many of my medical colleagues, people I've known from medical school, residency, and when I practiced medicine in Wyoming, and there are real concerns that safe, proven vaccines like measles, like hepatitis B and others could be in jeopardy. And that would put Americans at risk and reverse decades of progress. As we've seen over the last 4 years, the previous administration 4 years, when recommendations became politicized or were swayed by bias, that the public trust can be lost. So what safeguards are in place to ensure decisions are based solely on science and not politics? And how are you going to make sure doctors and parents can count on CDC guidance?
I mean, Senator, I would point this out. Right now, there's only 10% of children are complying with the CDC's recommendation on COVID boosters. Only 15% of healthcare workers. So Americans have lost faith in CDC, and we need to restore that faith. And we're going to do that by telling the truth and not through propaganda, by making them understand that everything that we say is true, that we're going to tell them what we know, we're going to tell them what we don't know, and we're going to tell them what we're researching and how we're doing it, and we're going to be transparent. It's the only way to restore trust in the agency, by making it trustworthy.
Thank you. Finally, with chronic diseases like you, I'm committed to addressing our nation's growing rate of chronic diseases. I think if we're going to make America healthy again, we need to support rural primary care providers that play a role. As a rural physician, I want to make sure we can prevent and manage chronic diseases in their communities, and I ask for you to continue to work with us specifically with regard to rural health.
Thank you, Congressman.
Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. For both of you, congratulations. Welcome to the committee. You know, this is a committee that gets work done. We last year passed permitting legislation, 15-4, bipartisan, because for a long, long time we've all agreed that environmental permitting requirements have delayed the halted needed infrastructure projects for our country to make sure that we have the energy and the ability to transmit that energy. Part of this is pipeline. So, Ms. Swett, even the courts have realized that this is out of control. The Supreme Court, as we've discussed this year, issued an 8-0 ruling that determined that reviews have become unreasonably burdensome. In the 7-county decision, Justice Kavanaugh wrote that, quote, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, is a procedural cross-check, not a substantive roadblock, but it's turned into a roadblock, and so the Supreme Court agreed 8-0. He continued, the goal of the law is to inform agency decision-making, not to paralyze it. So how do you believe this decision is going to impact how FERC reviews projects?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As someone who has been part of the NEPA process for many applications in front of FERC, I share your sentiments that the regulatory process can be difficult to navigate and also creates quite a bit of uncertainty for infrastructure developers who invest billions of dollars into securing our nation's energy future. I see 7-county as significantly narrowing the scope of environmental review required under NEPA, and now that it's more clear what FERC is required to do in examining the projects before it under the procedural statutes of NEPA, I am confident that if I have the honor of being confirmed, that with my colleagues, we should be able to take a hard look at FERC's processes to see what efficiencies are available, to see what we can make more transparent for the industry and to the benefit of the American people.
Thank you. Mr. LaSure, we talked about FERC being not really widely known about outside Washington, D.C., but the Commission's actions have a really big impact on the lives of Americans all across the country. The decisions that the Commission makes determines whether the lights reliably go on when people flip the switch. So please provide us your views of FERC's role in ensuring the reliability and affordability of energy.
Absolutely, Senator. I welcome that question, and thank you for discussing it with me. Reliability and affordability is a bedrock of FERC's work. So if confirmed, obviously I would follow the law, but we'd ask 2 questions of every single action in which we undertake at FERC as Commissioner. How does this make our grid and energy structure more reliable? And the second question we'd ask is, does this make our grid and infrastructure more affordable? and the answer to those questions is no, then it asks why we're doing it and why we're undertaking those things. So it's a fundamental balance of between affordability and reliability that impacts every aspect of our entire industry within our country. As Senator Lee said, it's such a large percentage of our GDP. It's important that outside of FERC that those impacts are recognized and those perspectives are welcome.
And Ms. Swett, we've had years of stagnant electric demand, but that's really changed because we're expecting a rapid growth with AI, with data centers, with electrification. As I pointed out in this committee in the past, that peak demand in the summer is expected 5 years from now because of all these things to actually increase as if adding an entire new California to the grid, even to the point that the New York Times had that as a front page story. The demand that is growing. Clearly, FERC is going to play a vital part in managing and helping with this growth. Can you share your views on the importance of meeting the demand growth and FERC's role in supporting that effort?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I actually have lost sleep a few nights worrying about how our country will meet the demand that it faces. And if I had the honor of being confirmed, I would do everything I can within the powers clearly drawn by Congress for the agency, and that is to ensure that there is plentiful supply of energy at just and reasonable rates, and taking a hard look at the merits of every single matter before me, including the specific geographic market characteristics of each matter, which are extremely different depending on what market they are, the type of company that's in front of the commission, and also how it interconnects to the grid. I would weigh all of those to ensure that FERC is mindfully encouraging connection and development of whatever it can.
Mr. Chair, my time's expired. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your efforts here because, as you and I know, and many know, that since 2009, 15 years ago, I've been warning that Obamacare would increase premiums in spite of what President Obama may have promised the American people, which I think was called the lie of the year. Now families in Wyoming are being hit with premium increases of up to $2,000 a month. I got a text today from a rancher who finds himself in that situation. Like, I've never supported Obamacare or any effort to expand this broken system, including the creation or the extension of the Biden COVID bonus payments that the Democrats put in place, and they chose the end of this year as the deadline date for that because they were supposed to be temporary due to COVID. What we're seeing now are the results that they speak for themselves. And Democrats would like families to believe that these skyrocketing premiums are the fault of Republicans. That couldn't be further from the truth. These spikes were predictable, they were warned about, and they're the direct consequence of the law that Democrats wrote and passed 15 years ago that not a single Republican voted for. And of course, that was a law that promised affordability and failed completely. So Brian, let me ask you, if these temporary subsidies were a solution, why have premiums continued to skyrocket even after Democrats poured billions into these COVID bonuses? What exactly did that money fix?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for that. I agree with you. The ACA has deep underlying structural problems, and the subsidies just exacerbate it. They just put more taxpayer fuel on a regulatory and subsidy structure that is raising premiums and raising prices and just creating a much more inefficient healthcare sector. And some of the inefficiencies of the ACA even bleed over into the employer market, and some of the rising premiums in the employer market are from problems with Obamacare.
So for Brian, and then I'm going to go to Doug after the same question. So 15 years now, I've been warning that Obamacare would devastate access to care in rural America. As Wyoming, rural state, frontier medicine. Many of our rural and frontier counties, there's only one insurer left, so hospitals are closing. So Brian, how can a family exercise choice when there's only one insurer, no insurance insurer on the exchange at all?
Yeah, they can't exercise choice if they don't have a choice of any insurers. What they need is additional options. States can put in place Farm Bureau plans, and we've seen about 15 states now allow Farm Bureaus to sell coverage that can benefit rural residents. Short-term limited duration insurance offers particular value in rural areas. They have much broader networks of doctors and hospitals that take that coverage than that accept ACA coverage.
Yeah. Doug, do you want to add anything else in terms of what we can do competition-wise in rural America?
You have to find pooling mechanisms, and Brian's outlined several. There are probably others if we put our heads together.
So are there reforms that we could actually put into law that would actually bring competition back into rural America?
Yeah, well, I think first, the One Big Beautiful Bill, by addressing some major structural problems within the healthcare sector and the government healthcare programs, put in place the Rural Hospital Transformation Fund, and that is $10 billion a year that is going to rural areas within states so that they can improve access to care for rural providers. So I think that is a real benefit of the reconciliation bill. And then just work on expanding as many options as there are and empowering patients with more control over the financing.
Good. Doug, for years, you and I've talked and I've been warning about Obamacare handing control of our healthcare system to insurers instead of the patients and providers. Has this consolidation under the ACA increased costs or just for patients and for taxpayers under Obamacare?
In general, consolidation increases the potential for market power and abuse of that market power. It's something that we need to watch in all sectors of the economy, includes the ACA. And generally, you find more consolidation where there's an excessive regulatory structure that the larger firms can manage and take advantage of, and makes a barrier for entry to new competitors.
So, Brian, in Wyoming, I've looked deeply into the numbers. What I see is, the number high subsidies. We're one of the highest subsidized states. You have the Biden bonuses on top of that. We have about a third of the people that are on Obamacare who pay zero. They're zero premium. Can you talk a little bit about these zero premiums, some of the schemes that have been devised under this Biden COVID bonus?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. The availability of fully subsidized plans have created a recipe for massive improper enrollment schemes throughout the country. Just yesterday, DOJ convicted 2 individuals who are running one of those schemes. It's a $233 million scheme. We estimate there's more than 6 million improper enrollees, and one of the best pieces of evidence that we have of the massive increase in improper enrollment is that 40% of fully subsidized enrollees in 2024 didn't use their health plan a single time. No doctor visit, no prescription, no lab test, and that's very unusual with people with health insurance. Most people with health insurance use their plan every year because so much goes through health insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Talk about what we've seen under the Federal Land Policy Management Act, because there are many tools there that are designed to uphold multiple use, the mandate that we have. One tool is a special land use designation known as the Areas of Environmental Concern, ACECS. Those designations have been used in the federal land management process since this law passed 50 years ago. The original intent was to provide flexibility and locally led protections. But what we've seen in Wyoming in the last decade has been a substantial increase in these designations. It seemed to me to limit use, to use these in ways to make non-use a use. And I just wonder if you could explain the increase in what we've seen in Wyoming of the last few years of this designation being used in a way that we never anticipated it being used.
Chairman Lee, Senator Barrasso, we've seen a substantial increase in ACEC acreage since our most recent planning efforts, and that's the Rock Springs RMP. It's good to note that RMP took place after the BLM's public land health rule, conservation land health rule, and so we certainly didn't see that rule fix our problem, which is that the BLM is utilizing the ACEC as a tool for large swaths of land, not identifying unique resources for protection, but hundreds of thousands of acres often, and really combining them with all sorts of things that we care about, like wildlife habitat and historic places, but doing so in a way that it's really hard to untangle and understand what we're actually trying to protect. It's unclear because we've got numerous uses. So we've seen a huge increase of ACECs in Wyoming. I think in my testimony I said 85% increase in a single RMP, and that RMP is only one of 7. field offices that we have. So a large increase.
So are these designations really being driven by local folks, or does it seem like it's more the federal government getting involved?
Senator Barrasso, an interesting question. It's hard to tell. Again, back to BLM's ability to track, we don't actually know often in our resource management plans who is nominating these parcels. There are two ways. The public can nominate. Also, the BLM can internally nominate. But for example, in the Rock Springs RMP, I don't believe it's anywhere is it stated. So we've seen certain nominations like the Sagebrush C nomination with 19 NGOs supporting that, 48 million acres. We at least know the NGOs that supported it, but for the Rock Springs RMP, it's really hard to tell where those nominations came from.
So the Biden administration's BLM finalized the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan in December of 2024 as that administration was on the way out the door. And I've worked closely with county commissioners to ensure that Wyoming stakeholders are included. Can I'm grateful that President Trump and Secretary Burgum are for announcing an amendment process for the Rock Springs RMP. Can you talk a little bit about the socioeconomic impacts that communities in the West, especially Wyoming, are seeing or impacted by some of these federal land management programs?
Yeah, I think it's easy to think of public lands as sort of being isolated out in the middle of nowhere. However, as you know, Senator Barrasso, our lands are often intertwined and intermixed. So we have different surface ownership, maybe than mineral ownership. We also have in-holdings inside of some of these areas. So anytime that the federal government, through an RMP or other rule, restricts some sort of use on federal land, there's often a restriction that also occurs on state and private land as well, further limiting our ability to develop resources, access certain lands, and so there's a big impact. The Rock Springs RMP estimated, based on their preferred alternative, was roughly $14 million a year in losses to county government, county services, including the school district. So we're not talking about inconsequential numbers, a fairly significant impact.
So in terms of the land management, what I see is federal overreach, particularly in land management across Wyoming. It seems ultimately so many of the final decisions aren't made locally, but they're made in Washington, D.C. How can we improve upon the land management process?
That's a great question, and I think one of the first things I would start with is that we have this idea of consistency and coordination, cooperation, but we do things sort of out of order. So the BLM can propose a land management plan with multiple alternatives, but maybe one or even none of those alternatives are consistent with state and local plans. How come we could really prioritize plans to have consistency done up front, allow for that building so that you're not doing the check the box at the very end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for